and a good evening. I am delighted that there are many of you here this evening. Today marks the third lecture in a series of lectures that marks the Silver Jubilee of the Mahatma Palace Museum. I went to the Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture yesterday to view their thesis show, and two of their senior students rushed up to me and said, I don't know how they knew my name. Mrs. Askari, you're having a lecture tomorrow with Bina Shah and Dr. Ayesha Mian. Can we come? I said, of course you can come. And they said, you know, Mrs. Askari, we think that they are the two most intellectual women in the whole of Pakistan. So there you are, corroboration from the youth. Can one ask for more? Our participants today, as you all perfectly well know now by, are two of the most intellectual women in the country today. Dr. Ayesha is a psychiatrist by training, but her expertise extends well beyond scientific knowledge or practice. She is a pioneer in her field, a committed healer of children and adolescents. Of critical public interest is the institute that she has established, known as Synapse, that focuses on women's well-being and mental health. By her own admission, Ayesha seeks to focus on her patients because she feels that with the attention that she can give them, they can actually evolve their narratives. She will explain, of course, what she means by that. Ladies and gentlemen, she seeks to nurture her patients to think, to pause, to ponder, and to reflect more deeply on their personal mythologies. Bina Shah is next, ladies and gentlemen, and she will weave a perfect warp for Ayesha's weft to create a wonderful fabric of public interest. She also manages to illuminate Ayesha's efforts as she deals with a very familiar theme of women emerging. She raises her voice against the inconvenience and uncommon bias that women face and the cultural stereotypes that they encounter in the workplace. Bina speaks with pride as women in leadership and in academia, and how the new societal and social norms need to emerge and will be more than the tip of the iceberg. Thank you. May I request, which of you would like to speak first?
Please start. I'll start.
May I request Dr. Ayesha Mian to commence the dialogue. Thank you, Ayesha.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Askari, and for that absolutely generous introduction. Really delighted to be here. One, because I think it's just such a lovely evening, Karachi in December and in the Mohata Palace, can't get better than that. But also because Bina asked me and I can't say no to her. So Bina is a lovely friend, someone I admire a lot for her courage, her bravery in what she writes and how she approaches, I think, the nuances of our society. So really glad to be here in this dialogue. And the two of us are going to converse for about 30-40 minutes. We'll talk about some of the things that are very important to her, are important to me, and also as we reflect on where we are in the place of like at this point in Pakistan and overall globally what's happening around us. And then we'll open it up to the audience to hear your reflections based on our conversation. So, Bina, let me go ahead and I guess start this conversation with the title. You wanted it to be when words meet truth. What does that mean? What were you thinking? Why did you think that rather than talking about your books or your newest books or the one that's coming, we need to have sort of a more comprehensive dialogue and why this? What? Tell us your thoughts.
Thank you, Ayesha, for that question, and thank you to Nasreen Askari, Hamid Haroon, everybody here at Mahaka Palace for putting this talk together. Thank you to all of you for making it here on this freezing cold evening. It's very hard, I know, to stay warm, but I'm sure we'll manage. When we started planning this lecture a year ago, actually, I had vague ideas about what I wanted this to be about. I wanted to talk about the necessity of art, and literature falls into that category. I wanted to talk about the necessity of art in difficult times, because I felt that we in Pakistan seem to always be going through a difficult time. So we need art, we need literature, we need so many things to keep us going. But when I got the date for the talk, that it was to be in December, and then the war broke out in Gaza, and we were seeing such terrible images on the television, on social media, everywhere, I just really felt that it's a time that blood is being shed. And it's a time when people are speaking out to tell the truth of what is happening to them, and they're paying for it with their lives. We can see the brave journalists of Gaza out there reporting. Several of them have been killed. A journalist was killed, a cameraman and a journalist, they were killed in southern Lebanon. So I wanted to have a title that really reflects the fact that writing, literature, reading, the arts are not pursuits that we take up only for entertainment. We take them up because they are matters of life and death. And there's nothing more important to life and death than blood.
Absolutely. And so, talk a little bit about the sort of the role of words, the role of writing, the role of storytelling in resistance. And I know that we're going through, actually, it's like I keep saying we're going through a really bad time right now. I think that we've been going through a really bad time for a very, very long time. I think we forget. And then every time something new happens, we're like, this hasn't happened before. And writers and authors and poets and artists, musicians have really come out, with resistance poetry, with the resistance art. So what's that role, and what's your sense of that history in Pakistan?
Well, I was just reading a novel this week, a light novel, nothing very heavy. It's called The Paris Library, and it was about how the American Library in Paris stayed open during World War II, and its motto was Atrium post bellum ex libris lux, after the darkness of war, the light of books. And I thought that this is something so important for everybody in a place like Pakistan, where we've fought several wars, but we seem to be at continuous war with ourselves. We are a country that fights against itself. And I think the only way out of this never-ending war is to educate ourselves, to illuminate what is important, what our values need to be, where we should turn, what we should hold dear, what we should fight for. Now, in Pakistan, there has been a wonderful, wonderful tradition of resistance literature. And I can think of no better example for this than Faiz Ahmad Faiz, the famous poet of Pakistan. He wrote resistance poetry. He was jailed for his writing. And yet, even today, people know his words and sing them at rallies and recite them at discussions and read them. The students read them. There are translations of his work, so people as illiterate as me can also understand what he said. We had another poet, an eminent poet by the name of Femina Reas, who is not with us anymore, sadly. And her poetry was a poetry of resistance to patriarchy. Feza Mekfez's poetry was a resistance to authoritarianism, dictatorship, what General Zia had done in his time of ruling Pakistan. So Nida Riaz had been seeing what was happening with the women of Pakistan for even longer than that. And her work, her seminal work, Badan Darida, Torn Bodies, is a classic. It's a famous classic. Another poet, Kishore Nahid, very, very important in terms of resistance literature. Her famous poem is, of course, We Sinful Women. Again, another type of resistance. So we have the tradition of using words to speak up. I don't like the phrase truth to power because, frankly, it's very cliched. Everybody uses this phrase all the time. But we in Pakistan have a fine tradition and a lot of courage when it comes to using our voices to speak truth to the powers that be. We also have novels that have borne witness to the actual military conflicts that we have faced in this country, and upheavals and uprisings and so on and so forth. We have a very wonderful book about partition by Bapsi Sidla, one of my mentors and one of my, a person that I looked up to very much when I was starting to become a writer. And her novel was, at first it was known as Ice Candy Man, then it became renamed Cracking India, and it was made into a film called Earth. And she used the vehicle of the novel to say so many profound things about what was happening to our country as it was being torn apart by sectarian violence, by the migration, by the refugees. It was a very violent time. We also have some fine novels that touch on the 1971 war, and one of those is Moni Moslin's The End of Innocence. Another one, there's Kamala Shamsi's Cartography, which I think talks about some of the devastation and the trauma that haunts us from that particular time, and that's another time when our country was torn apart. And for perspective from the other side, there's a Bangladeshi author by the name of Tanima Anam, who has written two very fine novels about the Bangladeshi War of Independence, A Golden Age and The Good Muslim. And I think that why I always turn to books and why I think there's the attraction of turning to books to understand things that we tend to discuss politically is because when writers make art out of these same subjects, when they create art, when they create literature, they are connecting us to all the writers of the world that have written about similar conflicts. Tolstoy, for example. Anybody who wrote about World War II, anybody who wrote about World War I, anybody who wrote about, for example, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie with Half the Yellow Sun, the Biafran War. So we are plugging into a great world tradition of artists who saw, who witnessed, and the only way they had to express and purge and cleanse themselves and leave something for history, something for the next generations, is by writing these books. These books bear witness to all of these very painful phases in our society and our history.
So I was just talking to Bina that every time I have to do one of these moderations and talks, तो वो रात को फिर मुझे ख्वाब में वही चीज़ें आ रही होती हैं. I guess I've been marinating on it and everything. And last night, sort of most of the books that you talked about were circulating in my mind, where I woke up to thinking about War and Peace, and woke up to thinking about The Kite Runner, woke up to thinking about Faiza's poetry and Femi Darya's. So I guess the idea being that regardless of where they're being written, the themes are all the same. The suffering is all the same. The humans are all the same. The context becomes different. And, there's just a lot that gets aligned. We can connect with globally with everybody, whoever's writing about these things. And I guess the role of writing just doesn't become one of catharsis, just doesn't become one about if you're feeling all of this anguish inside, then you find that space to write about it. But it also connects to the readers, to all of us who are reading it and kind of find that we're not the only one going through it. Somebody felt it and they've written this book. I wonder about Faiz's poetry a lot, that he wrote 60s and 70s में, but all of his poetry is still so applicable. I mean, just like कोई ऐसा दौर नहीं आता कि जब हम कोई फैज़ का शेर उठा के पढ़ लें तो वो applicable नहीं होता. And one of my most favorite couplets that he's written is चश्मे नम जान शोरीदा काफ़ी नहीं तोहमते इश्क पोशीदा काफ़ी नहीं, right? So it's not enough that we are just feeling the hidden scars. It's not enough that we have an anguished soul. Aaj bazaar mein papa chalo chalo, that we need to go out and we need to protest and we need to talk, and everybody's way of protesting becomes different. Some people will write and some people will read and some people will go out for protests and some people will draw art and make music. And as a psychiatrist, I guess I know that it's so important for the mental wellness, not just of our own self, but as a society, for society to be able to partake in these, not just to actually write, but also create, all of this great stuff. So let's move this a little bit to storytelling. I think it's been about 5 to 6 years that I've been absolutely captivated and fascinated by storytelling, and it's interesting because the way it started, this conversation started in my head, was that I was reading this really amazing book by Leslie Hazelton called The First Muslim, and she had written about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And Leslie Hazelton is actually a Jewish author who has this absolute love for the Prophet as a human being. And what she talks about in that book is about, it's pretty much storytelling, how this tradition of storytelling has been part and parcel of our history and our traditions and our culture, and how the Prophet, kind of when he was growing up in the deserts, there'll be all these caravans coming and people would tell stories, and he grew up listening to all of these stories, and even beyond that, that storytelling has. And then, moving into the space of the stories that we tell ourselves as our society, the stories of patriarchy that we tell ourselves, the story of misogyny that we tell ourselves, the stories of that हमें बंद करके रखा हुआ है, and we don't have a voice to speak in Pakistan, and Pakistan is kind of going. It's been 30 years or 40 years since Pakistan's been going to the dogs, and it's never going to get any better. That's one of the stories that we tell each other, and how table talks होती रहती है और हम उसको absorb करते रहते हैं, and we believe in them. We never think of challenging. We never think of, is my narrative going to be any different? So, what's your take on storytelling, and how do you see storytelling as such a strong medium of how we can actually shift the narrative around us?
I'm going to have to take some time to think of the answer to that question, because it's a complicated one.
Yeah.
I think that the way humans have evolved, we're the only species on Earth that tells stories to one another. We are also the only species that has a highly developed form of language and communication. All animals communicate, but we tend to talk a lot and write things in books and share things with each other. And that seems to serve a psychological need of sharing a burden. So that's one way of looking at it. And from your work in the psychiatric field that often when people are suffering from a mental illness, they are urged to write in a journal. They're urged to take their thoughts out of their heads and put it onto the page, and that is therapeutic. So there's something innate in the human being that telling a story, recounting events, allows you to think about what it is to process your feelings, what it is you've gone through, what it is that you are going through right now, It helps you to generate insight about what you are experiencing. And human beings do live on insight. It's not enough to just be told something. If you can think of a new idea for yourself, that is actually one of the most powerfully intellectual things you can do. If you can actually write that down and share that with other people, you've just magnified that power. I find it very interesting that we have evidence of storytelling all the way back to the time when humans were living in caves, and they found the caves in France where there were drawings of a hunt and animals and hunters killing the animals. And they were not, what were they doing? They were telling a story. Why were they writing it in a dark cave? Probably to A, to remember what it was they had done, B, to pass the time in cold, very cold, dark winters and ice ages and so on and so forth. They were entertaining themselves. And these are all things that lift the human spirit. And I see that wherever there is a conflict, or even in ordinary life, which is very stressful, it's very difficult, day-to-day living is hard, people have the immediate need for food, shelter, water, healthcare. But they always seem to go to two things after those needs are met: the education of their children and the making of art. And I think that Maslow had a hierarchy of needs. At the bottom was, of course, your safety, your full stomach, your happy home, your family. But then pretty soon along that hierarchy comes a need to express yourself. And through self-expression comes the term that he called self-actualization, where you actually evolve in your own life from an unaware human being into an aware human being with insight, with wisdom that you can then pass on to younger generations. So in a sense, storytelling is it's a survival mechanism. It does so much for the perpetuation of our species.
Absolutely. And so, again, from my work in the whole mental health field, every time there's a disaster, every time there's like an earthquake or the tsunami, one of the things that, war disaster, one of the things that we talk about a lot is that try to get the families and the communities to start coming together to draw, to sit together and tell each other stories, to just commiserate, to say what's happening in each other's lives. Get the kids to go back to play as much as possible. Can we have a little playground for them? The more we do that, the better these people heal. And there's so very, very clear evidence around mental wellness and art and creativity. So this in terms of positive psychology as well, both art, writing, journaling, music, all of these things have been shown to decrease depression. They've been shown to actually decrease shame, anger, and that you might be feeling after a traumatic incident. And also what happens is that when you get into that journaling space or writing space or creating art space, then all of your attention is focused in that one space. So it's an actual exercise in mindfulness, which actually works greatly to help with your immune system.
So I was very anxious about this talk today. And when you're anticipating something, the time just doesn't go. And I was like, oh my God, how am I going to spend the whole day till 6 o'clock? So what did I do? I started painting. I've been taking art classes for 2 years. Oh, I've been painting for 2 years and taking art classes for some time. And I started working on a painting, and the time flew, and I was absorbed in the work, and I was looking at the colors, and I wasn't thinking about the butterflies in my stomach or the sweat trickling down my back. Right. So it's powerful. Art making is so powerful. And I feel especially sorry for Pakistani kids when they say to their parents, I want to study art. And they're like, what do you mean art? Do something useful like engineering. I think we're killing creativity, and that is part of what is stunting us as a nation. It's that we're killing our creativity. Where are we going to come up with new ideas, new things to try, solutions, and so on and so forth, if we don't even encourage our children to be creative?
It's actually rather sad. I'm sorry, I keep wearing my psychiatry hat, and I see I'm one of the very few child adolescent psychiatrists. I see adults as well, but it's really sad that in our schools, art classes, music classes, and actual PE, or just going out and cycling in the playground, has really been cut down. And all we're teaching them is 1 + 1 = 2, which I'm like, they'll learn that anyways. And also just the whole idea of color between the lines, line se bahar nahi nikle, writing between the lines. I mean, every time we do that, we absolutely kill creativity. We kill one creative cell at a time. Every time we stop them from doing something. So yeah, so I think that I feel that over the past 8 to 10 years, we're sort of going back. The city is kind of going back to sort of having more festivals, more theater. More, there was a time when all of that had shut down. So it's really lovely to see
Yeah.
that all of that is coming back, but it's still not as much as it needs to
As
be.
long as we're trying, as long as we're keeping on, and now I think there's like 100 literary festivals in all parts of the country. There's a wonderful Pakistan Learning Festival that's for children, and it goes all the way from Karachi all the way up to Skardu and everywhere in between. There are literature festivals in Faisalabad, there's one in Hyderabad, there's in Sialkot, they're everywhere. And there are writers writing in the Urdu and the regional languages that are being invited to these festivals. So, when we talk about, oh no, nobody reads in Pakistan, I don't think that's really true. I think a lot of people read.
So there's hope. I mean, I'm the eternal optimist. So every time somebody says to you, "To kuch nahi ab hone wala," I always tell them that absolutely not. I think that it's changing, and lots of hope for this country. There's a concept that I've only heard from Bina Shah of personal mythology.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so tell us about that. What is that?
Personal mythology is sort of a phrase that I've been working with, an idea that I've had since reading the stories of the short story writer Amir Hussain. And he's written novellas and short stories. I don't know how many of you have heard of him, but he's a dear friend. And I realized that the work that he does, which he mines a lot of his past and his personal history to write stories, and every time he sort of comes up with a different version, but it's still the same events that he's drawing the inspiration from. And I was thinking that each one of us has developed a personal mythology about ourselves, where we came from, who our parents are, how we grew up, the difficult things that we did. For example, if your parents came over from India in partition and they endured tremendous suffering, that's a story that you hear. That's a narrative you hear all the time. It becomes part of the personal mythology. If you had an uncle who had to leave Dhaka in 1971 and had to escape with his life, also very traumatic. That is personal mythology. Because the more we get distance from the person that actually went through the event and eventually they pass away, and then we are left to carry it down, pass it down, pass it down, pass it down, then it sort of becomes hagiography in many cases, a very idealized version of the hero. It also becomes, a perfect love story. How did my parents meet and get married? How they immigrated to the United States. They had a gas station. They worked so hard, and today they're very, very affluent. That's mythological. I mean, these are stories that they are real life, but when we look at them in terms of a story, this is what happened, wow, then it almost takes on this mythological status. But Aisha, I want to go back to a point that you raised about the narratives that we hear in our society. And I want to say that I do agree with you that they can be very troublesome because they're so entrenched in our way of thinking. One of the biggest narratives, Pakistan is going down. It's going down. It's been going down since I was born. So, I mean, and why do we keep telling ourselves this story? Why do we keep focusing on the downward traction rather than looking at the upward? And if you actually take the time to look deeper than the front page of the newspaper or your WhatsApp group, if you actually dig into the lives of young people, grassroots activists, women from villages, people, There's a story everywhere, and it's amazing. I was on the street, I was driving somewhere, I see a man and a woman and a policeman crossing the road, and the woman's got, she's got a burqa and she's got her head covered. The man is carrying an ice pack cooler, and the policeman is with them. And I said, oh, they're vaccinators. They're polio vaccinators. Look at them, they're heroes. So, why are we not looking for these stories and these moments to illuminate what we see as forever darkness? And we're always talking about the country's going to fall apart. We have this enemy, we have that enemy. We can't do anything, we're powerless. There are forces bigger than us at play. But we have so much power. Every child that gets vaccinated for polio, that's a success story. So we have to change our attitude. We have to refresh our narratives. We have to think about what's important. What do we want to perpetuate? And we tell those stories so that gradually, slowly, we have a shift. This depressed attitude that we're going down the drain, everything is finished, it turns into, look at all the hope. Look at all the possibility. Every child that is born in this country is a new hope and a new possibility.
I was doing this talk, and when you were around, I couldn't come to the talk, on at other festival on storytelling in media and the mental health and wellness of our society. And one of the things that kept coming up was that, in the 80s, when PTV had a mandate for social sort of service, so they had to actually create shows and programs that had a social message to them. And now with the advent of 100 private channels that are really just focused on their ratings, the narrative is completely changed. So what they'll just keep showing what sells. And at a time when there were all of these dramas that were showing women empowerment, like the Ankahi and Dhoop Kinare, and even the ones Kapesh, and even the ones before that. Now we've got every drama that you switch on is showing an abused woman, or some woman who's being,
always crying.
It's like crying, or what. So it's like constant doom and gloom. And when I was talking to one of the TV producers, she pretty much said that every time you show a woman being empowered or walking out or standing up to her mother-in-law or husband or whatever it may be, or a school teacher, or whoever it might be, the ratings go down. Every time she's slapped or she's pushed back the ratings go up. And the dramas are mostly seen by women in Pakistan, right? So it's like I'm constantly thinking about it, that what is it that is, and one of the things that they said was that when a woman is shown to be abused, these women identify with them because they're also going through this in their homes. Versus you show an empowered woman and it's too far away, that's not them. So they lose interest in that. But again, my sense that, how do we shift this narrative? How do we fix it? Who's got that responsibility to bring about that change? And, when we were doing that book club with, Adam Grant's book called The Art of Knowing. And usme, he talks about the power of knowing. It's called Think Again, the Power of Knowing. And Adam Grant brings up this point about unlearning, which is so much more important than learning. That we learn something, but the world is shifting so quickly that it's as important for us to learn how to unlearn so that we can relearn again. And I know you wrote an op-ed about that.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, I think, is that while the women are being fed this narrative that your lot in life is to always be abused, and you will always cry, and your husband will always end up with your sister by mistake. That's the message that those shows give to women. The men, in the meantime, are being drip-fed this psychologically damaging narrative, I think, about politics. All politicians are terrible. Everything is horrible. There's 5G warfare. This is happening. That's happening. And, and this very patriotic, nationalist narratives that Pakistan is perpetually in a state of war with our enemy. We can never be off guard. That is why we need this, that, and the other. And, everything is a danger all the time. So we're just always on the edge of our seat. The women are always waiting to be slapped, and the men are always waiting to get bombed. And how healthy is this for us psychologically? It's not. And I also want to make the point that a lot of times when I've written something, or any of my colleagues have written about something negative that is happening in Pakistan, for example, if I write about acid attacks, okay, which have been a huge problem in Pakistan, they seem to be going down at the moment, which I think is not talked about enough, but I think that this is dropping in our country. It's very nice to see. I will be told by everybody on social media, why are you writing bad things about Pakistan? Are you being paid to make this country look bad? Who's paying you? How much money are you getting? And this is people who are not very well educated in the difference between art and propaganda. And I've always said that it is not my job as an artist, as a writer, to write propaganda for this country. It is my job to portray this country with as much honesty and authenticity as I can, because I am a part of this country. I love it as much as you do, but I reserve the right to write about whatever it is that I want, whether or not it fits your patriotic narrative.
Yeah. And I'm slapped for doing just the opposite, that you're always constantly saying, sab theek hai, sab theek hai, sab theek hai. How can you say that? Look at the state of the country. We also sort of, I think, have this attraction to tragedy. Right? Like that, it's like anything that has some sort of Rona, tragic, or doom and gloom kind of thing, somehow, it's like...
We're very emotional people, and I think that we're laughing, taking nothing seriously, everything is a joke. I'm going to drive the car with my kid in the front seat and no seatbelt, and who cares if they're sticking out of the sunroof. Either we're that, or it's the tragedy. Oh my God, somebody's died, this is so bad, that is so bad. So we're not an emotionally mature people, I think. I'm sorry to have to say that, but I think we just don't spend enough time in self-reflection. We just don't spend enough time thinking about our actions, the consequences of those actions. We just don't use this.
So I do feel that, the focus is always on the outside. क्या हो रहा है, वहाँ क्या हो रहा है, यहाँ क्या हो रहा है, उनके साथ क्या हो रहा है, and not enough.
There's not enough reflection. There's not enough self-awareness, self-assessment. I read a phrase in the Quran that I just loved, and I'm blanking out on which surah it was, but it says, I think it's Surah Qiyamah, and it says, I swear by the self-reproaching soul. What a beautiful concept. A soul that reproaches itself when you know that you have fallen short of what's expected of you by God, not by your neighbor and your auntie and your mother, but when you have fallen short of the expectations that your higher power has for you, does your soul have the ability to take stock and feel sad and sorry and grieve that you couldn't do better and try to do better next time? This is what we lack, I think.
So that Bina Shah says कि पढ़ इल्म के फाजिल होया कभी अपने आप में पढ़िया नहीं, right? That we just don't read ourselves. Another facet of Bina. So, talk a little bit about your writing, your work around feminism, and combating sexism. How do you feel? What's your role as an author, writer, journalist in sort of creating a certain image for women in Pakistan, or being that kind of role model? What would you like that to be, or what does that mean to you?
Well, I think it's helpful to sort of talk about how I came to feminism, which seems to be such a dirty word in this society. And it's not for me, so I have no qualms about calling myself feminist in any way, shape, or form. Really, I think after being here for several decades on this planet and in this country, I have always shaped my life according to the desire to see Pakistani women live life differently. I know there's much more that they could be getting, achieving, having, working with. There's so much potential, and they have been clamped in every way. And so I feel that I think my mother was the first feminist I ever met because she always said to me from a very young age, I want you to get your education because that way you stand on your own feet. I want you to have an education. And this is something I heard from the age of 8 onwards. And at the time, this was the Zia days, there was a lot happening with women. There were images of women being tear gassed, beaten, lathi charged on the street. A young, impressionable child sees this. At the same time, she's growing up from a young girl to a teenager, and there are all sorts of ramifications for that. Suddenly, she's not a carefree little girl anymore. Suddenly, she has to be careful of what? What is it she has to be so careful of? And why is it always her fault when things go wrong? This was such a pressure cooker. Then I ended up going to a college in the United States called Wellesley College, and it is probably the foremost feminist college, institute of higher learning, I would say, in the world. I was very, very lucky to go there because there I was able to find words, find teachings, find teachers, find role models for what it was that I wanted, which was a free life. A life without constraint, with responsibility. And there's a lot of responsibility when you have a good education, when you have the ability to communicate, when you have certain intellectual advantages. It's a lot of responsibility. So I would never take the feminism without the responsibility that comes with that. And that really is working towards an equitable and just society. And I've chosen as my medium, my writing, to do that work.
So, I think of feminism not really, it's a concept, but Urdu ka ek word hota hai kaifiyat. So I think it's more of that than, and I truly don't think that it's related to women, right? I think feminism is about equity. I think feminism is about justice. I really think feminism is about freedom. So, you say your mom was the feminist, my dad was the feminist, who said you absolutely need. So I wish we could sort of, separate it from this idea that, feminism is about women coming out and, burning their bras or whatever it might be, right? That it's not that.
I don't pay attention to what people tell me feminism is. I don't need them to tell me what it is. Especially some kid sitting somewhere in his bedroom in some town and he's just looked at social media and now he thinks he's going to tell me what is feminism. No, sit down, be quiet.
Yeah.
So, where does that take us?
So I think
take us.
Yeah, I think this is a good time for us to, open it up to you all for any questions, any comments, any ideas that you all may have.
Yes. Question in the back.
Question.
Give us a minute to get a mic out to you. And please introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and No, let's have the
I
mic.
think it's right here.
It's good for the recording as well.
My name is Ella. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Bina, my question is directed towards you, please. You spoke about a personal mythology, right? That's something that resonates with me because I'm familiar with a little bit of Joseph Campbell's work, and he seems to form this idea about personal mythology as well. So I was just hoping to hear from you if it comes into play when you're actively writing something. Does it?
How do you mean?
I mean, does your personal mythology come into play for you when you're in the process of writing?
Yeah, there was one book in particular that I wrote. It's about sin, and it's called A Season for Martyrs. And it combines a lot of the historical episodes in Sindhi history with a contemporary story set in 2008. And for this book, I mined my family mythology. There were some very interesting characters that we had.
Thank you. That's just as someone who's interested in writing. I just wanted to
absolutely.
ask you
But just make sure they don't sue you.
that. Yeah, I hear you. I hear you.
If they're dead, it's okay, but if they're still alive, gotta
Yeah,
be
I
careful.
hear you. Thank you.
Anybody else? No.
No one has any questions?
Okay, we can go home, I guess. Oh, all right. Yes, please.
Sure.
There's a question in the. Which one of us do you want to answer that question? Ayesha, why don't you take it?
So, I have found in my 49 years of being that hope and optimism and an outlook to a certain outlook to life is not connected to having or not having what we call the privilege, for example. So you'll find plenty people that in my mind would be like, oh, there's poverty, or there's pathology, or they're going through a difficult time in their lives, and they'll have hope, and they'll have faith, and they'll have contentment. And then there'll be people who seemingly have everything in life and choices that are sort of presented to them, and yet they'd be like feeling a sense of hopelessness. So I think that is a lot more nuanced than just having or not having. There's just so much that goes into. I was having this conversation with someone, I was talking about being religious and how that brings you a lot of faith even when things are not going your way. And that person was like, she's a historian, and she's like, it has nothing to do with religion. Yes, I mean, religion is one way that you can have that kind of faith and stuff, but there are some people that just have that kind of gravitas, that kind of wisdom, and not necessarily coming with age, where they're like, whatever we have, we live in the here and now. This is good enough, and if it's not there, then we'll make it work and we'll move forward. And some people just are like constantly yearning for more, or constantly looking for something that's not there. The focus is always on what's not there rather than what is.
More questions?
There's one. Yes.
Excellent. Second row. Mike, baby. We'll send them to you, Aisha. The despondent ones.
Thank you so much for that really engaging talk. So I basically teach literature at the university level, and obviously this is very much within the scope of discussion that we have every day. Why are narratives, why is literature so important? And amazingly enough, we just had a discussion of that in our university today, and about low enrollment in liberal arts colleges, about literature, because students think more about money now rather than engaging with these narratives that are so healing for us. And part of the reason is obviously that their parents keep telling them that there's not a job market for that they shouldn't be doing this because there's just no opportunities in this. And I guess my question is directed towards Bina, and what she would say to convince those parents that the importance of these kinds of things in our lives when they are chucking out money specifically for that kind of education.
I honestly don't know what to say, because I think it's everywhere in the world. It's there. Nobody's happy when your kid says, "Hey, I'm going to be an artist." No parent is truly happy about that. They convince themselves to be happy eventually. And you can tell them that 25 years down the line, I will actually make enough money to buy my own art supplies. You won't have to subsidize me anymore. The arts are a hard road. It's a hard path. I'm not going to lie to you. As a parent, if I were a parent, my heart would sink if my kid told me I think I'm going to go to art school. I would be worried for them. This is a tough world. How are you going to sustain yourself? So you have to balance those practicalities with the idea that your son or your daughter or your child needs to fulfill this part of their destiny. And we can't control everything. We cannot be sure that we're going to have a kid, they're going to go to medical school, they're going to go and become a very wealthy surgeon. How do you know what's going to happen to that person in 10 years, in 20 years? Parents always want to have everything worked out for their children in our culture. And they need reminding that there's no way to control for anything. So if they're trying to do something and it's something that is so good for them, it makes them so happy, so healthy, and giving it up. I mean, have you ever seen Dead Poets Society? Right? The kid can't act in the play, so what does he do? I mean, you don't want that kid, so make your parents watch that movie also. I would say that's a good.
So I want to add to that because I get put in this position a lot as an adolescent psychiatrist where parents are like, "Samjhaye isko kuch." And then I'm like, I just had such a sad day today because my daughter decided not to take literature in A levels. And I was like, why are you doing this? Please take literature. I've got, of course, then there's that route, aapne to kar liya, aapne medicine kar liya, you have a job so you don't realize, these things. But I'll just tell you very quickly a personal anecdote. So I did my O levels and then I went to St. Joseph's to study science because my parents at that time felt that medical school ke liye inter karna zaruri hai, A levels mein mushkil ho jayega. And I was so devastated that I just went to British Council and enrolled for private A levels in English literature and religious studies. And I just did it because I was interested. And I will tell you that those 2 years of studying religious studies or the philosophy of religion and English literature has probably sustained me through extremely difficult years during med school and residency and whatever and every time there was a crisis. It was just that those 2 years really taught me how to think, how to reframe, how to question, how to look beyond what's black and white. So, regardless of what your children choose to do, I always tell parents, have them do a couple of social science subjects. It's incredibly important for them to learn how to critically think, which will not come from science and engineering and business and finance. Right?
Thank you, Ayesha. Ladies and gentlemen,
There's one question.
is there another question?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay.
They're shy tonight.
In the black t-shirt. Sorry, polo shirt.
Can you stand up so we can see? If you don't mind? Thank you.
My name is Bulla. I'm from the segment of youth. जब हम बड़े हो रहे थे हमने मतलब न्यूज़ पे सुना कि यहाँ पे बॉम्बिंग हो रही है और अब चीफ ऑफ आर्मी स्टाफ चेंज होगा तो जो है ना ऑपरेशन का नाम भी चेंज होगा तो जब आपने बताया कि वी आर अट्रैक्टेड टू ट्रेजेडीज राइट तो मैं ये समझता हूँ कि मतलब वी आर अट्रैक्टेड टू ट्रेजेडी और ये दिस इज द ट्रूथ राइट तो क्या हम इसे कनेक्ट कर सकते हैं ट्रॉमा के साथ आई मीन दिस इज ट्रॉमा वी लिव ना न्यूज़ चैनल पे सुनना कि यहाँ पे बॉम्बिंग हो रही है यहाँ पे बॉम्बिंग हो रही है सो और अब भी प्रेजेंटली एवरी डे वी हियर दिस न्यूज़ कि हमारे वी आर गोइंग टू गो बैंकरप्ट so right trauma is not going to stop then how do we cope up with that like my question is from Ayesha.
Okay, so see the thing is that and I'm saying this with sort of a grain of salt here that we will choose a narrative in our mind that will help us sustain our status quo, right? अगर मैं ये कहती हूँ कि नहीं इस वक्त इतना बुरा हाल नहीं है देयर इज होप देयर इज स्टफ एंड देयर इज स्पेस फॉर मी टू शिफ्ट समथिंग देयर इज स्पेस फॉर मी टू डू समथिंग एंड कुछ बिकॉज अगर होप है तो दैट मीन्स दैट आई कैन डू समथिंग इन माई लिटिल सर्कल ऑफ इन्फ्लुएंस टू शिफ्ट समथिंग सो देन आई विल have to be enterprising. I will have to take initiative. Right? When you actually make yourself believe कि कुछ नहीं हो रहा ये तो वैसे ही doom and gloom है, so it's easy to kind of say I'm not doing anything. And then you can justify your kind of state of helplessness and not doing something. So I feel that that's what happens with human beings. That tragedy kind of makes you kind of stay in this space where you kind of feel कि मैं तो कुछ कर ही नहीं सकता इसलिए मैं कुछ नहीं कर रहा या मैं तो कुछ कर नहीं सकती और अगर आप ये बिलीव करें कि नहीं there is space, there is hope, there is something that's shifting, कुछ करने से होता है, then you will be forced to shift, and that's hard for humans to change their status quo and shift and do, because you will need to take some action and take some energy. And that's what I tell the youth a lot, that don't sit with that feeling of hopelessness. There's a lot that you can do. आपकी वजह से अगर एक इंसान भी कुछ बेहतर हो जाए, एक इंसान का एक दिन बेहतर हो जाए, एक चीज़ हो जाए, you've already done your bit for that week or for that month and stuff. So I feel that that's what happens. That is why we kind of, and of course trauma is tough. Trauma तो बहुत interesting है, because generational trauma होता है, historic trauma होता है. I mean, it's like if we were to think about it, I mean, the Jewish people are still using the trauma of Holocaust, which has been passed on to them generationally. We are still kind of feeling the trauma of partition and the 71 ki war and 65 ki war. So trauma actually shifts, and you sit with a lot of fight and fright kind of space, but trauma also brings a lot of resilience. And we miss that. We don't talk about that enough. A lot of the people that are doing some incredible work are people that have gone through some very, very traumatic, experiences in their lives. So it also brings that peace, and we just don't talk about that enough. That also gets passed on.
The concept of post-traumatic growth. We always hear about post-traumatic stress disorder,
PTSD होता है, but there is post-traumatic होता है.
Yes,
Absolutely.
that's a great question. Yes.
This will be the last question, Jay.
No, but I
Thank
feel like
you.
there's like a very fine line.
Could you identify yourself,
Oh,
please?
sorry. My name is Hera. Okay.
And
So,
what do you do? Where are you?
I currently live in Turkey.
I see.
Yeah,
Right.
I moved there after I got married.
How privileged.
I moved there after I got married, so it's okay.
So not so much privilege.
Not so much privilege.
Lot of good coffee.
So I feel like there's still like a very fine line. Like for example, what we see right now, like what's happening in Gaza. So at one point I'm like, okay, I need to do everything I can. I'm sharing everything. But after a while, like seeing everything, I go into like this really like kind of like a depressive state. Then I'm like, I don't feel like doing anything, and so I'm like, but if I'm not doing well, I won't be able to like talk about it as well. So there's like a very fine line between like sharing it and then going into like that very depressive state as well. So like, how do we like balance it?
Self-care. Yeah, I mean, basically, you should not. I do not watch or read the news more than once a day. I will not do it. I mean, this is my space. What's happening to children over there and mental health, this is my space. But once a day is enough. I will not watch any reels. It's ridiculous because I'm not able to do much at all after that. The whole day is gone. And मेरे देखने से किसी को कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ रहा है. I am only getting some sort of कि मैंने देख लिया या मैंने आगे share कर दिया. It's not so. I mean, all evidence will basically, I mean, all mental health experts will tell you, do not watch, जब भी कुछ भी trauma आता है, कहीं पे भी आता है, do not watch news or reels more than once a day.
But then there's like this added guilt, like when you're not doing anything, then there's this guilt, like I'm going on with my life, I'm so privileged, like I can do this and I can do this, but people over there are suffering as well. So.
Well, I mean, I said you do what you can. I think it's important to understand there's a concept called rational compassion. You've only got this much compassion ka reservoir. So how will you ration it out? And what's the best way for you to ration it? So sharing, is that the best way to ration it, or can that be used somewhere else to make sure that something like this doesn't happen in Turkey? I don't know, right? So, what's happening to kids over there? यहाँ पे कम बच्चों के साथ रोजाना बुरी चीजें नहीं हो रही होती. So can I shift my compassion to some place where I can do something about things? So I think that piece is very important, that how do you ration out compassion? Just feeling bad about something only brings empathy fatigue. It doesn't get you anywhere, it doesn't get anyone else anywhere either.
I think it's time that I should thank our participants for their illuminating discussions. Their profession also permits them to use wonderful turns of phrase, rational compassion. I haven't heard that before. Could I possibly ask all of you to say thank you to our speakers and that we are privileged to have had them here, and now it's time for tea. Thank you.